Great Britain has a rich history of deer hunting and the consumption of venison meat. But as cities and demands on natural resources have grown, conservation management has become an increasingly debated topic. I'm going to be traveling the countryside to see what the reality is and learn about what the future holds for deer management. Hunting has become a controversial practice in modern times. My name is Dan Cabela, and I'm traveling the globe to explore the true impact that hunting is having on our remaining wild landscapes. This practice goes as far back as human history can remember, but does it have a place in modern conservation? There are several species of deer that are prolific across Great Britain. Some of these species have been introduced in the 1800s, while others are native to the island. As human populations have expanded, the space remaining for natural land use and conservation has decreased. While there is a strong push for rewilding in many landscapes, there are also other land uses competing for space, such as forestry and agriculture. Deer are a resilient family, and their populations have thrived to the point of overpopulation in some areas. Deer can cause damage to agricultural crops, particularly in rural areas where agriculture and deer habitats overlap. I'm going to be spending some time in Great Britain to learn more about land management practices and their impact on deer as a whole.
So this is Craigmeggy Nature Reserve. It's owned and run by Nature Scott, and in the last 40 years or so, they've been embarking on a quite substantial deer management project to reduce browsing pressure on the ground to allow natural regeneration of the trees.
And you're trying to put it back the way it was?
Well, not necessarily put it back to the way it was, because I think that's a general assumption when it comes to conservation management. But in actual fact, the majority of conservation management tends to be trying to make landscapes more climate resilient. So we've got different climate in the future potentially. We're going to definitely see wetter, milder winters here and kind of maybe drier spells too. So it's about kind of future-proofing this woodland and this landscape to make it more resilient to those threats going forward.
Deer browsing can also impede forest regeneration by inhibiting the growth of tree seedlings and saplings. This poses a significant challenge for sustainable forestry management and can hinder efforts to restore native woodland habitats.
This plant here, it's quite unpalatable for deer. You find this down your riversides and that sort of stuff. So that tends to be one of the first things that gets away quite easily. Things like willow that we've got here, and then birch as well. Birch is meant to be an unpalatable species, but in actual fact, if it's all that the deer have got to eat, that's what they'll go for. It's kind of preferentially browsed in that respect. And often, first stages of natural regeneration is from birch, because it's a pioneer species. It sends its seed right up the hillside, and then it grows quite happily. But then, because it's all the only thing for the deer to eat, apart from the heather and the shrubby layer underneath, that gets hammered as well, and it really struggles to regenerate too. It's not just deer as well. We have quite a lot of sheep in Scotland. And this landscape here was quite heavily grazed through rough grazing of sheep, which was a land use at the time. And that does have an impact on habitats too. As we transition to a more conservation-based land management style, there's probably going to be less sheep on the hill. So we're going to have a higher focus on deer management in those areas where there have been sheep.
Managing deer populations in Great Britain has become a complex issue with ecological, economic, and social considerations. Deer culling is a management tool used to control deer populations and mitigate their impacts on ecosystems, habitats, and human activities. It involves removing deer from a population through a variety of methods.
What we're finding is about 4 or 5 deer per square kilometre is allowing us to get natural regeneration here. And there's roughly about 100,000 deer in Scotland are recorded as culled. We estimate maybe probably about 50,000 to 70,000 other deer that are unregistered in the cull figures. So we're thinking probably about 150,000 deer are shot in Scotland every year.
Deer culling is typically conducted by trained professionals, wildlife managers, or licensed hunters, following specific guidelines and regulations. The goal is to maintain ecological balance and healthy deer populations.
It's an animal that has no natural predators. Man removed those some hundreds of years ago. And they are extremely successful animal, and they have to be culled to manage the population. And it's also, of course, for the benefit of the animal, because if they're allowed to breed and continue, then they wouldn't have enough food. There would be all sorts of problems. So by culling them, we keep the population healthy.
The goal of culling is to maintain ecological balance and healthy deer populations. Specific deer species such as red deer, roe deer, and fallow deer are targeted, as they are the most numerous. In closed ecosystems, with few natural predators, the management of species like deer is necessary to ensure their long-term population health and balance within wild landscapes as a whole. The landscape is primarily hilly with open patches on the edge of the forest. This is where you normally find deer feeding. In addition to helping to maintain the health of deer populations in Scotland, the management of deer species is an important income stream for rural communities.
Our communities, especially our rural communities, are incredibly fragile. A lot of people are moving to the cities, and then that kind of breaks away from what goes on in the countryside and can take away jobs from the countryside.
I'm also assuming that if you lost the shooting sports, that these areas in the conservation that are being done would probably go fallow or be converted to forestation or something else.
Yeah, they would diminish without a doubt. So it's important that we educate, it's important that we have a voice and promote the rural areas, and that then attracts people to continue on a way of life that is vital.
What do you think the future looks like for these rural shooting estates?
I think they'll be safe for many years to come because they are an important tool from tourism to biodiversity to employment and to keeping rural communities thriving. They play such a huge role in our countryside.
You know, across the country, we're looking really to try and take that balanced approach when it comes to both private and public interests. When it comes to nature, deer sporting is not going to go anywhere. We really need that to be a vital tool in delivering on our ambitions as a country as well. What there really needs to be is that balance of objectives, so people are supported in that transition to more conservation-based management of deer. When you're trying to manage impacts, you really want to keep deer out of areas like this. 20 years of endeavour goes down the pan in one season if you don't do that.
Stalking is an age-old tradition in Scotland, a practice that requires skill, patience, and a deep knowledge of deer behavior and habitat. Most of the stalking is done on foot, with the goal of getting as close as you can and harvesting an old male past their prime.
Well done, Dan.
Thank you.
Good shot. Yeah, that's a warrior. Busted both of his antlers off fighting.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. This will be a good one for the freezer for sure.
The venison trade in Britain is an important source of income for rural communities and a healthy source of protein. The meat that comes from controlling deer numbers is a healthy source of protein, which is sourced sustainably.
You've got really be 4 or 5 main products. You've got haunches, which are the back legs, and from the haunch we make steaks and pieces of meat for roasting. And some of it also goes into diced for casserole and so on. Then you've got the loin, which is a very popular part, so the fillet. From the shoulders we get casserole and so on. And then there's the neck and the flanks and the shanks and so on for mincing, either straight mince or sausages and burgers.
We are more conscious about where our food is coming from today than ever before, particularly when it comes to meat. Venison is gaining popularity, which in turn gives the practice of harvesting this meat value.
It's estimated that over 1 million people are shooting in the UK actively, whether on a daily or weekly basis, and that is fantastic. But obviously we want to encourage more people to get into shooting and into conservation because we see the benefits that it brings for our countryside and employment. And it's also just from a point of view of mental health and well-being that, you know, a day out shooting with friends or family, whatever it may be, is such a positive attribute of living in the countryside or even coming into the countryside from the city. It's very much part of the tradition of our country, but it's also bringing and delivering those huge benefits to conservation, to biodiversity and land management equally.
While there is a strong anti-hunting sentiment within the UK, there is a role that hunting can play within the conservation management of ecosystems, as well as deer species. Amidst the competing land uses, when hunting is the primary use, the land is kept in a natural state, and with proper management, fauna and flora can thrive.
There's a lot of knee-jerk reactions nowadays where all of a sudden this is the next best thing to do is this, stop shooting, stop hunting, do this, and 10 years later people are scratching their head going, was that the right thing to do in actual fact? We've lost all that now, we can't get it back. So we're trying to create an estate that's nicely balanced, but the focus is on renaturalisation of the estate, of the natural habitats. The Victorians straightened out all the rivers and put all the walls in and stone-picked all the fields and cut all down all the trees and bushes within the field to allow the pastures for the sheep to graze, which is fine in good ground, but on this marginal ground, we feel the importance is more about the environment now. We do need to manage the deer so that we can see the natural regeneration coming back. I just think it's about finding that balance for the sporting side of the business and the rewilding side of the business to work in harmony.
If deer become overpopulated, they begin to have a negative impact on their own population health and the habitat they depend on. By selectively managing their numbers, we are provided with a valuable food source and are maintaining a balance that will allow many species to thrive.
The kind of heads that I'm trying to encourage. So the kind of stuff that we're shooting at the moment is all sorts of stags, slightly younger, and we're trying to shoot slightly older stags, thicker antlers higher up. And these guys are just displaying a little bit more age than what we're typically shooting at the moment. I'm trying to find a balance now between choosing the right kind of stags to shoot, leaving the right kind of stags. Right. But I'm actually considering sitting down with my brother and taking a lump of the estate and just saying, I'm going to leave that. That is going to be entirely left alone from stalking. It's a quiet zone. No one goes there. No one shoots deer there. No one stalks there. And it's somewhere that deer can feel safe. I think that's important.
A holistic approach is required for the management of land biodiversity in the UK, and deer stalking is certainly a part of that strategy into the future. Thoughtful decision-making around the management of deer is required to ensure that deer populations remain healthy and habitats are managed to accommodate all land uses. Collaboration between all stakeholders is essential for developing and implementing effective deer management plans that promote ecological resilience, support biodiversity conservation, and minimize conflicts between human activities and deer populations in Great Britain.